The voicemail from my brother came in at 11:37 on a Tuesday night. I didn't hear it until the next morning when I was already sitting in the hospital parking lot trying to figure out how I was going to pay for what they'd just told me inside. I should back up. My name is Wren. I'm 28 years old, and until about 6 months ago, I thought my family was just a little distant. The kind of family where nobody really talks about feelings, where holidays are fine but never warm, where you learn pretty early on that asking for help is more trouble than it's worth. I told myself that was normal. A lot of people grow up like that. I was wrong about what normal meant. I didn't find that out until I got sick. It started the way a lot of bad things start, so slowly that I kept explaining it away. I was tired all the time, but I was working 2 jobs. My joints ached, but I sat at a desk for 8 hours a day. I'd lose focus mid-sentence and forget what I was saying, and I'd laugh it off, chalk it up to stress. It took 4 months and a doctor who actually listened before anyone put a name to it. Lupus. An autoimmune condition that, in my case, had already started affecting my kidneys. The specialist sat across from me in a small office with a dying plan on the windowsill and told me I'd need to start treatment immediately. Immunosuppressants, monitoring, possibly an infusion series depending on how my labs looked in 6 weeks. She was kind about it. She handed me a folder of information and said, "You're going to want someone with you for this. Do you have family nearby?" I said yes. I believed it when I said it. My mom lives 40 minutes away. My brother lives 20. I have a dad who I'm technically still in contact with, though in contact means we exchange texts on birthdays, and sometimes he comments on my Facebook posts. We are not close. We have never been close. But I still thought, I think most people would think, that a serious medical diagnosis was the kind of thing that would bring people together, that it would override whatever low-grade distance had settled between us over the years. I called my mom first, that same evening. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I told her what the doctor said. I used the word lupus. I explained the kidney involvement, the treatment plan, the fact that I was scared. There was a pause on the other end of the line. And then she said, "Well, that's a lot to take in. Have you looked into whether your insurance covers all of that?" That was her first question. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Do you want me to come over?" Not, "What do you need?" Insurance coverage. I told her I didn't know yet. She said she'd look into some natural supplement options she'd read about and send me a link. Then she said she had an early morning and needed to get to bed. We were on the phone for less than 4 minutes. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time after that. I told myself she was probably in shock, that she'd process it and call back. I gave her until the end of the week. She didn't call back. My brother Owen is 32. He's the kind of guy who's always seemed like he has everything handled. Good job, nice house, serious girlfriend, opinions about stock portfolios. Growing up, he was the responsible one, the one my parents pointed to when they wanted to illustrate what getting your life together looked like. I used to admire that about him. Later, I just found it exhausting. I texted him on a Thursday. I told him about the diagnosis and asked if we could talk. He read the message, I could see the read receipt, and didn't respond for 2 days. When he finally did, it was 3 sentences. "That sounds tough. Hope the treatment goes well. Let me know if you need anything." "Let me know if you need anything" is the thing people say when they don't want to be needed. I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say? The person who did show up, the only person who showed up, was my aunt. My mom's older sister, Constance. She lives about an hour north of me, and she called me the morning after I finally told her. Not because she heard it from my mom, but because I reached out to her directly. She said, "I'm coming Saturday. I'm bringing soup and I'm staying the weekend. Don't argue with me." I cried. I hadn't cried yet, not really. Not since the diagnosis. I'd been holding everything so tight because there was no one to fall apart in front of. And something about her saying "I'm coming," so matter-of-fact and warm, broke something open in my chest. She came. She stayed. She sat with me at the kitchen table while I read through the treatment paperwork, and she asked smart questions about what my options were, and she helped me organize my medication schedule. She didn't once bring up supplements or insurance premiums. She just helped. I don't know what I would have done without her during those first weeks. The treatment started in April. Infusions every 3 weeks on top of daily medication and regular blood work. My energy was unpredictable. Some days I felt almost normal. Other days I could barely get off the couch. I'd adjusted my hours at work, which meant a pay cut, which meant my budget was tight in a way I hadn't had to deal with since my mid-20s. About a month into treatment, I got a letter from my bank. Not an email, a physical letter, which is already unusual, which should have been a sign. It was a notice about a joint account, one that I didn't remember having. I sat down at my kitchen table and read it 3 times. The account had been opened 2 years ago. It listed me and my mother as joint holders. There was a balance of just over $14,000, and then a series of withdrawals over the past 4 months that had brought it down to $900. I had no memory of opening this account. I called the bank's fraud line and spent 45 minutes on hold before I got a human being. The representative walked me through the account history. It had been opened with my signature. My actual signature. Not a forgery, she clarified. On a form dated 2 years back. I asked when, exactly. She told me the date. 2 years ago, that date, I had gone with my mother to her bank to help her set up online bill pay. She'd said she didn't understand the interface and needed me to sit with her. We were there for almost 2 hours. At some point, I'd signed several things she slid across the table to me. Authorization forms for the online account, she said, and something about adding me to her emergency contact information. I had signed my name to a joint account without knowing it, and for 2 years, my mother had been making deposits to it. Small ones, irregular. $40 here, $150 there. The kind of amounts that don't look like anything on their own. And then, beginning in January, right around when I started getting sick, right around when I first mentioned to her that I might need help covering medical costs, the withdrawals had started. $5,300 in January, $3,900 in February, smaller amounts in March and April, totaling just over $4,000. Gone, all of it. I want to be very precise about what I'm describing because I know how it sounds and I know some people won't believe it. I am not saying my mother is a monster. I am saying she had access to money that I unknowingly co-owned and that she used it and that she did not tell me and that she did not ask. When I called her, she answered on the first ring. That surprised me. I asked her about the account. There was a silence, a different kind of silence than the one when I told her about my diagnosis. This one was the silence of someone figuring out what to say. I needed it, she said finally. I had some bills. I was going to pay it back. I asked her how she was going to pay it back when she hadn't told me the account existed. She said, "Wren, you've never been good with money anyway. You wouldn't have even known what to do with it." I don't know what I expected her to say, but I know I didn't expect that. I didn't raise my voice. I was actually very calm, which surprised me. I think when something is bad enough, your nervous system does this thing where it just goes quiet, goes into some kind of still, functional mode. I told her I'd be in touch. I hung up. Then I called my Aunt Constance. She didn't react the way I expected her to either. She didn't yell or immediately tell me to get a lawyer, though both of those would have been reasonable responses. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Okay, let's think about what you want to do here." That's the thing about Constance. She never tells you what to feel. She asks you what you want to do, and she helps you figure out how. What I wanted to do was understand first whether what my mother had done was actually what it looked like. I needed to not be the person who accused her own mother of financial fraud based on a misunderstanding. So I went back to the bank. I brought my ID, and I asked to see the original account opening documents. The account had been opened jointly with both our signatures, and the terms were standard. Either account holder could withdraw funds without the other's consent. That's the thing about joint accounts in the US. You don't need permission. It's not fraud in the way you might think of fraud, with stolen credit card numbers or identity theft. It's perfectly legal. She had access, and she used it. But here's what the bank rep also confirmed. I could close the account, remove the remaining funds, and I could consult an attorney about whether the circumstances of how the account was opened, the fact that I had signed documents without understanding their purpose, constituted any kind of actionable misrepresentation. I thought about that word for a long time, misrepresentation. I went home and I did something I'd been putting off for 2 weeks. I called a lawyer. She was a woman named, well, it doesn't matter. You'll understand why in a minute. What matters is that she specialized in elder financial matters, but she also handled cases involving family financial disputes among adults. I found her through a referral from my HR department at work, which offers a limited legal consultation benefit that I'd never used. She listened to everything: the account, the signing circumstances, the withdrawals, the timing. She asked careful questions. At the end, she said there were a few avenues worth looking at, but the most immediate thing I should do was transfer the remaining balance into an account held solely in my name, document everything, and request the original account opening paperwork in full. I did all of those things that week. There was something else she mentioned, almost as an aside, that I kept coming back to. She said if there are any legal documents that give your mother or anyone in your family authority over your finances or your medical decisions, you should look at those right now. Given what you've told me, this is a good time to make sure those arrangements reflect what you actually want. I didn't think I had any such documents. And then I thought about the stack of paperwork I'd signed when I first got the diagnosis. During those early weeks when I was scared and overwhelmed and not sleeping well, I thought about how my mother had offered to help me organize it. I thought about how she'd been there at my kitchen table while I went through it. There was one form I'd signed that I hadn't looked at closely. I'd assumed it was for insurance purposes. I found my copy in a folder in my desk. It was a healthcare proxy form. My mother was listed as my healthcare agent. I read it twice. Then I called my aunt. "Constance," I said, "I need to ask you something." She said yes before I even finished the sentence. I'm not going to walk through every step of the legal process, because honestly, it's a lot of paperwork, and most of it isn't interesting. What I will say is that revoking a healthcare proxy in the United States is, blessedly, not complicated. You write a revocation statement, sign it in front of a notary, provide copies to your healthcare providers and your previous agent, and you're done. It doesn't require a court appearance or a lawyer, though having a lawyer review your new documents is smart. I appointed Constance as my new healthcare agent. I also, with my attorney's guidance, established a durable power of attorney for financial matters, limited in scope, with specific and explicit restrictions on what she could and couldn't do on my behalf. My attorney called this a limited enumerated POA, meaning it listed exactly what Constance was authorized to handle and nothing else. It was not a blank check. I also named a third party, a family friend who works in finance and who Constance agreed to review any significant decisions. That took about 3 weeks from start to finish. During that time, I didn't speak to my mother. I didn't speak to my brother. Owen had sent me one more text around the time I started researching the legal options that said, "Mom mentioned you two had a disagreement. Hope you can work it out." That was it. A disagreement. That was the word he chose. I have thought about that word a lot since then. A disagreement is when two people see something differently. What happened was not that. What happened was my mother used access I didn't know I'd given her to take money from me while I was sick and scared and barely holding things together. That is not a disagreement. I don't know what the right word for it is exactly, but it isn't that. The Sunday after all the documents were finalized, I drove to my parents' house. My mom and dad are divorced, have been since I was 14, but my mom still lives in the house I grew up in. I hadn't been there in almost 4 months. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes, just looking at it. The house looked exactly the same. That's the strange thing. Nothing on the outside had changed. The flower boxes in the front windows had fresh plants in them, petunias, the same ones she planted every spring. There was a new mat on the front porch. It said welcome in block letters. I thought about what welcome meant, what it was supposed to mean, and I got out of the car. She answered the door quickly like she'd been watching for me. She looked the same too, a little tired maybe. There was a moment where her face arranged itself into something that might have become a smile, and I could see her deciding whether I was coming to apologize. I wasn't. I had a folder with me, nothing dramatic, no lawyer present. Just me and a set of documents that I'd had my attorney prepare and review. The revocation of the healthcare proxy. The new POA, limited and specific, with Constance's name on it. A letter from my attorney outlining what had happened with the joint account and noting that I had retained documentation of the account history, the withdrawal timeline, and the circumstances of the original account opening. The letter did not make any threats. It did not demand repayment, though my attorney told me that was still an option I hadn't foreclosed. It simply stated the facts, noted that I had legal counsel, and made clear that I was revoking all prior legal authority she had held in connection with my affairs. I handed her the folder. She didn't open it right away. She held it in both hands and looked at me. "Wren, you don't have to say anything right now," I told her. "I just wanted to do this in person." She said, "I don't understand why you're being this way." And I'd thought about this too. I'd thought about what I would say when she said something like this, because I knew she would. I knew she would frame it as me being difficult, me overreacting, me making things bigger than they needed to be. I said, "I think you do understand. I think you know exactly what happened. And I think you thought I'd be too sick, or too grateful for any help at all to do anything about it." She didn't answer that. I said, "I hope you're okay. I genuinely do. But I'm not going to pretend that what happened was nothing." I walked back to my car. She was still standing in the doorway when I pulled out of the driveway, holding the folder. I cried on the way home. Not the way you cry when you're devastated. More the way you cry when something that's been sitting on your chest for a long time finally lifts, and your body doesn't know what to do with the extra space. The treatment is going well, by the way. My labs at 6 weeks were better than expected. My specialist used the phrase "responding nicely," and I made her repeat it because I wanted to be sure I heard it right. Constance came to that appointment with me. She sat in the waiting room reading a magazine, and when I came out with the good news, she hugged me for a long time in the fluorescent light of that hallway, and neither of us said anything. And it was enough. I've thought a lot during all of this about what we're taught to expect from family. The idea that blood creates obligation, that people who share your last name will show up for you in ways that strangers won't, that love is automatic if you're related. I grew up believing that, or at least hoping it. I think a lot of people do. What I know now is that the people who showed up for me during the worst thing I've been through were not the people I was supposed to rely on. It was one person, my aunt, who was never obligated to do any of it, who drove an hour with soup and stayed the whole weekend and never once made me feel like a burden. There's a concept in psychology called the availability heuristic. The idea that we overweight information that's easy to access, examples that come to mind quickly. Most of us have easy access to ideas about what family should be, from movies and holidays and childhood stories. We think about those ideals and we confuse them with the real people in our lives. We stay loyal to the version of family we were told to expect long after the evidence suggests we should reconsider. I'm not saying walk away from everyone who has ever let you down. Some things are repairable. Some people, if you give them the right kind of space and time, will surprise you. But I am saying, Look at who actually shows up. Not who says the right things, not who sends the link to supplements or replies with 3 reassuring sentences. Who shows up? Who sits with you? Who asks what you need and then does it without making you feel like you owe them something for it? That's your real support system. And it's allowed to be small. It's allowed to be just one person, or 2, or none yet, because none yet means you're still building it, and that is something you get to do on your own terms. I changed my emergency contact at work last month. I updated my records at every medical office I use. The name in that blank is Constance's now, and every time I see it, I feel something I can only describe as relief. My brother texted me last week. He said he'd heard some things and wanted to talk. I told him I wasn't ready. That might change. I don't know. What I do know is that I'm not going to rush it. I'm not going to minimize what happened to make someone else more comfortable. And I'm not going to apologize for protecting myself. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, especially someone who never even noticed they were cold. I keep thinking about the moment I sat in my car in that driveway, looking at the petunias in the flower boxes, same ones every spring. Everything on the outside exactly the same as it always was, and I realized that's the part that had kept me confused for so long. When the surface of something looks familiar, you keep assuming the underneath is safe too. It wasn't, and the truth is, the signs were there before my diagnosis, before the bank letter, before any of it. They were in the 4-minute phone call when I said the word lupus, and my mom asked about insurance. They were in my brother's 3-sentence text. They were in every moment I told myself that distance was just how some families worked, and that I should be grateful for what I had instead of honest about what was missing. What I've learned. Not from a book, not from a quote I saw somewhere, but from living through this, is that the people who show up when it costs them something are revealing their character just as clearly as the people who disappear. Constance drove an hour with soup and stayed 2 days. She didn't do that because it was convenient. She did it because that's who she is. And my mom's absence, my brother's careful distance, their choices were just as much a portrait of who they are. There's a version of me that would have minimized all of it. That version of me was very practiced. She'd been minimizing things her whole life, calling it maturity, calling it not making a big deal out of nothing. What she was actually doing was absorbing harm quietly so that nobody else would be uncomfortable. That's not strength. I used to think it was, but it isn't. Real strength. The kind I had to find in the middle of the worst health scare of my life. Looked like this. It looked like making a phone call to a lawyer when every instinct told me to just let it go. It looked like reading documents I didn't want to read, and understanding what they meant even when the answers were hard. It looked like walking up to that front door with a folder in my hand instead of an apology. That took something from me that I had to build deliberately. The clarity to see what was actually happening and not what I wished were happening. The discipline to respond to it carefully, legally, without blowing everything up in a single angry conversation. And the backbone to follow through even when it hurt, even when I was still in the middle of treatment, even when part of me would have given anything for my mom to just have been who I needed her to be. I didn't get the mother I needed. I got the aunt who showed up anyway. I got to learn, at 28, that family is something you recognize by behavior, not by biology. Wren, the version of me on the other side of all of this, changed her emergency contact, updated every file at every doctor's office, sat in a fluorescent hospital hallway and heard the words responding nicely and cried in a good way for the first time in months. That version of me is doing okay, and she didn't get there by being fine with things that weren't fine. Neither will you.